Well, it is almost 2:01, so everybody, welcome to the March 2021 meeting of the Philadelphia Association of Critical Thinking. I am Becky Strickland, the secretary. We have been meeting via Zoom for an entire year. We miss the face-to-face meetings, but Zoom has brought us attendees and speakers from around the world. We'd like to give a shout out to Scott Snell and his National Capital Area Skeptics down near DC, and welcome to all of our attendees today. FACT supports science, reason, critical thinking, and science education. We encourage the thorough investigation of controversial or extraordinary claims using scientific methods. Please see our website, www.fact.org, to join for $25 a year and or donate to our General Operations and Science Fair Prize Fund. Your membership and donations help us sponsor quality speakers like Mr. Bryce today, and also help us cover our Zoom and meetup costs, plus activities such as our annual summer picnic, all of which are free and open to all. And now some information on the Zoom meeting. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A box for questions. You can type them in at any time. We'll do the Q&A at the end. Please make your questions concise. There is also a chat box down there, and that allows you to communicate with each other and the organizers. I'm the Q&A host. I do not monitor the chat function at all. I only monitor the Q&A. Our speaker today is Ian Bryce from Australian Skeptics. It is 5 o'clock in the morning, Australian time, or Sydney time. I know Australia has more than one. Eric will introduce Ian. Welcome, Ian. Go ahead, Eric.
Thank you very much, Becky, and welcome to everybody coming at us today, and future people who will be seeing this on YouTube. Today is March 20th, and this is FACT, the Philadelphia Association for Critical Thinking. We try to help empower people to use their full minds in response to paranormal and fantastic claims. We've been around for about 25 years. Our main function is to have these meetings, which are 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, eventually to be in person again on the third Saturday of the school year months that's at 2 p.m. We hope to eventually return back to the Community College of Philadelphia, which we've appreciated them hosting us. We have encouraged anyone to become a member of our group. You can see us online at phact.org to hopefully support us. We do a lot of things more than just putting on these lectures, including giving out prizes for science fair competitions locally. Our next speaker will be for April 17th, Mark Edward, a famous skeptic who's gotten a lot of press in the popular press investigating different faith healers. He has a book, Psychic Blues, also a movie of by the same title. He does an amazing job of doing a better job of channeling the dead than the scammers do. So he can tell us all about what goes on behind the scenes for people who try to take advantage of other people that way. Very entertaining story. But getting back to our speaker of today, our group FACT is one of many local groups all over the planet in many different countries that try to locally respond to paranormal claims in our respective areas. The Australian Skeptics have done an excellent job in their area doing the same thing. Years ago, Ian and I collaborated on offering an unwelcome interjection of engineering expertise and real science and skepticism into free energy claims down that way. But without going furthermore, I'll let Ian tell us all about the wonderful efforts that the Australian Skeptics have done to try to promote science and reason. Go ahead, Ian. Thank you, and thank you very much for getting up so early.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Eric and Becky. It's a great pleasure to be here addressing the Philadelphia Association for Critical Thinking, and I'm sure we'll have a great time. So this talk will cover a bit about Australian skeptics, their origins and what they do and their awards and other investigations. And then I'll go into more detail about some interesting cases that I've investigated over the decades, particularly those with a scientific bent. So the Australian Skeptics was created in 1980, following initiatives by a number of skeptics in Australia and overseas, including Randy, Dick Smith, Philip Adams, Richard Carlton, and Mark Plummer. And they held some water divining tests at Dick Smith's expense and effort. And that got such publicity in the newspapers that the organisers got so many inquiries that they decided to set up Australian Skeptics, and I joined them in the following year in 1981. So that was 40 years ago, and I've been investigating claims involving science ever since. Still am. So a bit about what we do. We have a monthly Skeptics in the Pub session. There's a photo of one group, although it's been on Zoom for most of the last year. We occasionally have dinner speakers where the skeptics get together and with a fairly detailed talk by an expert in some field. We always hold an annual conference, a lot of them under our belt now. This year they were on Zoom, and next year we'll wait to see what's happening next year. And there are always many overseas speakers at such events. Of course, Randy and SGU and Susan Gerbic and many others have been here quite a few times. And there's a Skeptic Zone podcast, of course, which comes from Australia. There are many online campaigns. You'll see some of those. And the campaigns are run through the magazine, through the online newsletter, through Facebook and Twitter and podcasts and on television, as we'll see later. So the main publication is called The Skeptic. There's quite a few around the world. It comes out 4 times a year. It's on paper and also online. Back issues are free, and they're also searchable. So you can look up a topic such as UFOs and get every article that's been published on that topic for 40 years. And we exchange articles with the Skeptical Inquirer occasionally. More on that later. And I mentioned the monthly newsletter, and I also mentioned the podcasts. So we have a number of awards. Skeptic of the Year, and someone involved in the skeptical movement gets a positive award. There's the Thornett Award for the Promotion of Reason. That's following one of our late members who dedicated his later life towards promoting science and reason. And the Wallaby, which is in honour of Barry Williams, our past president, who wrote under the pseudonym Sir James R. Wallaby, which is an anagram of his name. And we have a Critical Thinking Prize. They're monetary prizes, or there are some of those are monetary prizes, and they get awarded a certificate and a handshake and much appropriate response, applause at a conference, annual conference. We do have a negative award called the Ben Spoon Award, presented annually. You might remember a spoon bender called Uri Geller, who was exposed largely through the efforts and skills of James Randi, who was able to duplicate most of his spoon bending and key bending efforts. And you'll notice now that the award originally was sitting on one tier or one plinth, but we added a second one when that filled up, and we've now got a third one, which is also being filled up. So no shortage of recipients of that. And it's awarded to the perpetrator of the most preposterous piece of paranormal or pseudo-scientific piffle. So there's an alliteration for you. And we come across people who deserve this award, or they're nominated by our members, and we give them less courtesy than we do to the positive awards that we present face to face. But we must be very careful of accuracy for obvious reasons, because it's not an award that's sought after by the recipients, and they're not invited to the awards ceremony. The closest we got was this chap, Peter Brock, and his energy polarizer, which you put on your car. He was a racing car driver, a very successful one too. So when he came up with a crystal-powered device to make your fuel more active, the skeptics weren't happy. And Mobil Petrol had a means of promotion was a cardboard cutout of Peter Brock standing by the petrol pumps around Australia to publicise their petrol. So the skeptics managed to award him the Ben Spoon Award in cardboard cutout form, if not in person. This is as close as we've got there. Bit about our $100,000 challenge. Of course, Randy had his $1 million challenge. Well, the skeptics have got a very similar one. We've worked closely with Randy on many different collaborative projects, and this is they're closely related. But since 1982, this has been on offer. The money has varied a bit from time to time. The money is there, of course, and can be happily paid out if need be. Other groups in Australia, such as the Victorian Skeptics, also offer a prize. And you can see details at that website. So there's the check for $100,000. The challenge says it's to people who claim to have extraordinary powers. They need to demonstrate their ability under proper observing conditions, which is a term from Randy, of course. Proper observing conditions covers many fields, paranormal originally, and psychic particularly. It would cover supernatural, and these days it's a bit broader, anything new to science, which is why I administer that prize. I coordinate the investigations and correspondence to do with the prize. Examples: to generate free energy, lots of those, or to read minds, lots of those. To communicate with extraterrestrials would do the job, although that wouldn't violate the laws of physics, but would still be novel enough that we'd be happy to hand over the prize. Or to tell the future. How it comes about: a person or group can apply for the $100,000 prize, which some have done. We hear about them and approach them through investigations, or third parties bring them to our notice. If it's valid, they'll get the $100,000 check. They'll get prestige and recognition. And since this must involve a discovery new to science, they'd be candidates for the Nobel Prize, of course. More on that later. And we'd be very happy to be associated with such an event. So if someone should win it successfully, we wouldn't run and hide. If it was a genuine event, we'd be happy to bring it forward and promote it. For example, something to do with climate change or energy would be very appropriate. If, however, we find it was unfounded or even fraudulent, we will reserve the right to expose this situation so that clients do not waste their money on such things and their time, and we always publish the result. So they're roughly how the challenge works. We've had many applications over the decades. Okay, now I'm going to start talking a little about medical investigations and campaigns. Now, my expertise is in physics, so I'm reporting here on the work of others in the skeptics. So we believe that medical claims, false claims, can do a lot of harm. And we have lots of strong medical expertise in the skeptics. We have for the 40 years, and that's supported by social media activists who can respond very quickly online, which is not my area again. So the spin-offs from the skeptics' medical expertise include a group called Friends in Science and Medicine, otherwise known as FSM, which can also mean the Flying Spaghetti Monster. So maybe there's a bit of a joke there. That's as figureheads, they've got some very eminent professors in Australia and a very active lady called Loretta Marin, otherwise known as the Jelly Bean Lady, because she got sick of seeing mattresses or blankets advertised with magnets in them. So she made a blanket full of jelly beans in pockets and claimed it was just as effective as the magnets. And one of our GPs, the GP on our committee, Dr. Brad, frequently appears on the Channel 7 Sunrise show, offering his scientifically based expertise. So, one example, vaccination. The evidence is very clear, obviously. There's great benefits in vaccination and very, very rare harm. And the Skeptics published many articles on vaccination and the motion against it and the effort for it, the campaign for it. So each May, we hold a flu vaccination event, or we did before COVID, where the skeptics line up and get a jab from Dr. Brad to show how confident they are in the application of science and vaccination. So there are still deniers, despite this saying that vaccination is harmful. Specifically, the Australian Vaccination Network, AVN. Now, AVN was really an anti-vax network, which is misleading. Their name was misleading. And it was run for a long time by a president that America gave Australia called Merrill Dorey, who was the most vicious anti-vaccination person in Australia, and possibly still is. Their claims were very misleading. However, we got our revenge with you because we gave you Ken Ham. Maybe you can let me know later if anyone knows of Ken Ham, the Australian creationist. He found he couldn't get enough traction in Australia because the skeptics followed him around laughing at him. And so he went to the USA, Kentucky, I think, and set up an Ark Park. No kidding, with a full-size Ark there. And people riding on dinosaurs and so forth. I'd like to hear if any of you have been to Ken Ham's Ark Park. Meanwhile, with Merrill Dorey's AVN, the skeptics responded with the SAVN, Stop the AVN, a very active group for a decade or more. And we complained to the government, and they forced the AVN to change their name in 2013 to Australian, and they changed it to Australian Vaccination Skeptics Network. However, we weren't too happy with the word skeptics in it either. So we gave them a bit of curry and they changed it a few more times. And some of those people migrated to the IMOP, the Involuntary Medical Objectors Party, which was a political party promoting the anti-vaccination message that was headed by Michael O'Neill, who I've confronted from time to time, and Barbara O'Neill, who's a naturopath, and she gives faulty health advice, and due to the skeptics' action, she was banned for life from giving health advice. So you can succeed, you can get somewhere. A bit more on vaccination. It's been in the news for the last year with COVID, and in Australia we've taken great interest over the past year over the battles between Trump and Dr. Fauci. And we noticed that the vaccines are now being rolled out around the world, which is fantastic. We're very pleased to see it. Great triumph of science. And yet still the protests are out there. We do not consent. So very puzzling that they still believe that. Okay, this is some information of showing some statistics on COVID. This is my own work, my own observations in gathering this data from this website. And I think you can see here the top chart shows the main causes of death in the USA over the last year. And the top one is coronary heart disease. The next one, the purple line, is COVID-19. And then it goes down through lung disease, lung cancers, and so on and so forth, all the different ways down through kidney disease and suicide, all the way down. And you see that COVID is number 2, very prominent in deaths in the USA. Now, the lower graph is the same presentation for Australia. And where's COVID gone? Again, the most common cause of death is coronary heart disease, perhaps as you would expect. But where's COVID? It's actually off the bottom of the chart. You can see it down the bottom there. It wouldn't feature on the chart, except it's been brought in manually. And in Australia, for some reason, the number of COVID deaths in Australia per capita is 24 times lower than the USA. So we hear that you're turning the corner now, which is great. And I'm sure that the skeptics' efforts to promote reason and science have made an influence there. But in Australia, we don't count the COVID deaths anymore because there aren't any, virtually. We used to count the number of new COVID cases each day, till that's typically the report on that says there have been no new COVID cases involved in community transmission for 30 days or 40 days or so forth. So again, that's become a problem that's been overcome in Australia. Why the difference? Well, I think I've observed that Australians in general have a greater respect for their federal government and their scientists than we've seen in other countries in the past year. So I think that's quite dramatic, that chart there. Okay, homeopathy uses very dilute materials, diluted to around 10 to the minus 30, which is a large factor, meaning not even one molecule of the original ingredient is present. However, the theory of physics and dilution is complete. There's no possible mechanism by which this could work according to science. And yet there's also no evidence that it could work. And yet there are many practitioners on homeopathy around the world. And the skeptics participate in what's called the 10 to the 23 campaign, which is, of course, is Avogadro's number. And that tells you roughly how much you need to dilute a substance before there's none of it left. And nevertheless, homeopathy uses materials which are diluted about 10 to the 30 times, beyond belief. Chiropractic, big in Australia, manipulates the spine and neck, very lucrative for practitioners. They find new markets all the time. Cure cancer, cure all ailments, cure week-old babies. We think that's bad, claiming that. It's been tested many times. It might be effective for back pain, but not for any other problem. Our university here has a chiropractic course which they offer to students. That was investigated by skeptics a few years ago. They criticised it as being non-evidence-based, whereas the university claimed that their studies were all evidence-based. So after that embarrassment, the university tried to sell off their chiropractic course, but could not find a buyer. So maybe we're achieving something here. The Therapeutic Goods Administration is the government body that's responsible for regulating medical goods and services. But the problem is they're funded by fees from their clients, which is largely people, companies selling these so-called nutrients. And so they're held to very little account. There are registered products which undergo some scrutiny, for example, medicines and pacemakers. Yes, we would hope that your heart pacemaker receives some scrutiny. And then there are listed products, which there's no real scrutiny, vitamins, traditional Chinese medicine, and so forth, herbal remedies. And FSM, Friends of Science in Medicine, has a running battle trying to get them to really regulate. And unfortunately, there are medical rebates for suspect devices such as chiropractic and aromatherapy, but occasionally the skeptics have a victory and get some of that tidied up, so that people's money can be spent on things that work. Okay, some examples of challenges and investigations in my own area now. So my background, my first career was in radio and optical fiber communications, which exploits electromagnetic theory for useful purposes, light and radio waves. My second career is in aerospace, which involved aircraft and rockets and spacecraft, which was overcoming gravity. So with electromagnetic theory and gravitational theory, I feel well covered to understand the forces of nature. And I find that's useful for investigating physics-related claims for Australian skeptics. So my claim is that there are no gaps in how the world works, at least at a fundamental level. In other words, what we know about physics is enough to explain pretty well everything that goes on in the world, and what it doesn't explain can't lead to the claims of the psychics and free energy people and paranormal and so forth. That means we can be quite confident in examining many claims that appear to contravene the laws of science. Okay, here's one of the challenges we had involving the USA, in fact, telepathy across the world. So someone came to us and said they were able to communicate by means unknown to science. This was from a Sydney person in 2010. In more detail, they said they could communicate information to a colleague in the USA in real time. So we agreed on a test protocol. The Sydney team involved that included the claimant or sender and their representative, legal representative, and they would transmit symbols randomly chosen in real time from an agreed selection to his colleague, the receiver, accompanied by a lawyer who would join the second Skeptics team in New York. This was set up again at about 5 a.m. here because of the time difference. If only we'd had that flat earth. We were prepared for several outcomes. Symbols that match, which would call a success. Then we'd go to a second test with stricter controls and the money would be handed over. Symbols that did not match would be a negative result and a good article. And we're also prepared for an attempt to cheat. But what happened took us by surprise. The New York team waited and waited and waited. And so the New York team were a couple of skeptics there. We'd arranged, called Lisa and Jacob. Some might know them, or maybe they're even watching this talk. I don't know. This was in January in New York, so conditions were not good. So they waited on the sidewalk and waited and waited, and the receiver party never turned up, and the skeptics team there was not happy. Being summer in Sydney, we were not so concerned. So our psychic said, we asked our psychic what was going on, and he said, I'm as mystified as you are. He said, okay, we'll let you contact them. Here's your mobile phone back. And he said, I don't need that to contact them. So that was interesting. Anyway, some days passed, and he finally came with an answer and said, I found out they got stuck in the lift. Can we repeat the test, please? We said, first, let us speak to your receiver, please. Who is it actually? You haven't told us who it is. And he said, it's an Indian spirit guide. We were forced to say, we suspect that your psychic receiver exists only in your mind. And that's where the challenge lies to this day. So we did carry out a test, and we prepared for all the outcomes, and we got a report for the magazine. That's a snip from the article as we reported anyway. So for the future, we got some practice in running a test. Do we need to pre-screen candidates? Well, I don't know. James Randi had great success without pre-screening. He felt he could handle everything on the day, and he did as many tests which were quick and under proper observing conditions and dramatic. And if you pre-screened them, maybe you wouldn't get to such a test. So I'm not sure. Okay, next topic, the wine card, which is a wine improver. It's a device like a credit card, which is claimed to contain precise frequencies that produce long-lasting natural resonance. The resonance can be transferred to wine through the glass. They were selling for $75. Their website showed some purported tests where it appeared to work. The skeptics challenged the makers to perform a controlled test on television. They said yes, but only delayed. It looked like they didn't want to be tested. So we did our own test of skeptics in the pub with controls. I made a placebo card that was the same size and weight for a double-blind test. They were both wrapped in paper and labelled X and Y. And we let the skeptics in the pub taste 2 samples of, we poured two glasses of wine in each case, one we treated with the card and one we treated with the placebo. And then people had to say whether the X or the Y glass was better. So here are some of the results. Some people thought they were equal, some got Y was better, some got X is better. In the end, we added them up and 7 people said the wine card was treated wine was better, and 6 said the placebo card treated wine was better. And we didn't reveal at the end which was which. So it was a double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomised test in the pub. And we concluded that wine card doesn't work. So it shows that you can do a serious test while having fun. Very important. Okay, free energy. This goes back a long way for me. These 2 chaps challenged us for the $100,000 prize in about the year 2000. They firstly had a small motor, which they said will run on a battery for longer than it's entitled to. As a scientific statement for you. Here they are with the machine, which grew and grew and grew. As the dollars from their investors accumulated, so did their machines. There's one of their machines. You can see it's got a rotary machine with the shaft, which is inside it, and it's got electromagnets, and it's got lots of wires, and it's got commutators to know when to switch the electromagnets. They couldn't give us an accurate circuit diagram, so we got someone to discuss it with them and sketch out a diagram which looked like that. So again, it involves a motor and a dynamo and batteries and electronics and instrumentation, as you would. So they got some investment. They showed us their patents. When I investigated this, I spoke to their attorney. He said, I told them perpetual motion was impossible, but they didn't want to know. They didn't want to know. So that wasn't a good sign. In 2000, their website said it was 6 months from production. In 2016, following the power failures in South Australia, when such things were back in the news, they still said it's 6 months from production. So we had 3 articles in the Skeptic as a result of that. Okay, another free energy machine. Ian Claridge approached the Victorian Skeptics claiming the $100,000 prize. There was correspondence. We had a joint visit in January 2015. That's a photograph of his machine, which has got motors and generators and electronics and batteries and so forth. So we had an inspection of the machine and a discussion, and we worked out how to do a protocol. We agreed that there were 2 aspects to his claim: over parity and self-sustaining. So one thing that we noticed about it was that I pointed out to him that if you follow the electrical circuit around from the AC comes out the right, goes through a rectifier, goes through some resistors and off to the batteries, there's just one little problem. There's only one wire from the rectifier to the batteries. I said to the guy at the time, look, do you realize there's only one wire here? How can electricity flow through that? It's on a wooden frame, so it can't. How does the current get back? And he lifted up the bonnet of his car and said, look here, the alternator has only one terminal on it. And it works. And I said, yes, but the return goes through the metal engine and the metal alternator casing. And here you can see the lead from the engine casing to the battery, the black negative lead. You need 2 wires. And later on, and then I suggested to him that perhaps you should go on a basic electrical course to learn a bit more about this. He said, no, I can't afford that. I've already spent $7,000 and I can't afford any more. So that, again, was a less than satisfactory response. However, he then sent us photos some weeks later of his modified machine, which is the bottom photograph. And the change is he's now added a second wire to go from the rectifier to the batteries. So he took my suggestion on board. So I'm wondering whether I can claim some of his profits through pointing that out to him, that I'm not holding my breath. He gave us a demonstration. It ran for 60 seconds and got slower and slower as the batteries depleted and stopped. And we corresponded over the coming months. He kept getting more and more powerful magnets. He said it needs bigger batteries and more powerful magnets. So we've all heard that before. That's some of the, that's Ian in the center left, surrounded by skeptics involved in the test. Okay, so we never got the system to sustain. So the outcome was we got a real challenge for $100,000. We got an inspection, we got a demonstration, we got a good article, and it triggered us to develop good test protocols. So the over parity test was done, that we planned was like this. You can see here we have a device under test, which is regarded as a black body with no storage. We measured the electrical power going in, voltage and current, and we measure the electrical power coming out. And then you calculate, you compare the power coming out with the power going in, bearing in mind that one is often AC and one is often DC, and you have to make some proper conversions there. And so it's an over parity test. His claim that is over parity, producing twice as much output as input, for example, can be tested by that means. And in fact, these two tests were suggested by our patron Dick Smith. More on him later. So that you can have an over parity test where the device is a black box, and you've got to measure it in that form. The other one is the self-sustaining tests. You can even do this without instruments. Dick said, we don't need complicated science here. We want something that's under proper observing conditions, all visible to the observer. So in this case, the device's batteries can be regarded as inside it. You don't need to know what's in it then. Device under test, it's a black box. We just need to inspect the batteries and identify the maximum energy storage. For example, there might be enough to provide the required output for 1 hour. In that case, we might ask for a 2-hour demonstration. We measure the power coming out and how long it provides it. So that's self-sustaining. Basically, all you have to do is sit there and watch it till it stops running. So that's the second test. So now we've got the over parity test and the self-sustaining test, which we can offer to claims of free energy. Okay, now this one's my more major investigation. Andrea Rossi in Italy and his ECAT cold fusion device. So this was brought to the attention of Dick Smith, as I mentioned, who's an Australian businessman and adventurer, been Australian of the Year. He flew solo by helicopter to the North Pole and around the world by helicopter, publisher of Australian Geographic, a philanthropist who supported many worthwhile projects, who was approached to invest in Rossi's ECAT. And Dick, being very keen to investigate such things, simply told the applicant, great, give me the name of a scientist who says it works and I'll write you a check. So we're surprised to thereby get an email presenting a scientific report by 2 Swedish nuclear physicists saying they had observed Rossi's device and it appeared to work. So Smith thought, well, do I have to hand over the money now? No, I better go to Australian Skeptics and get them to look at it. So that's where I came in. So that picture shows Andrea Rossi with his device and the 2 Swedish scientists inspecting it. Well, legit, perhaps. So the claim was that you flow water through a device and the nuclear reaction occurring in the center heats up the water and turns it into steam, and you can measure the amount of water and steam and so forth. They even had a theory. His colleague, a physicist, came up with this Widom-Larsen theory on how it might produce energy. So they did have a theory, which they couldn't get anyone to publish, funny enough, but it was nevertheless looked like a physical theory saying how the It involves electrons and antiprotons and neutrons and electrons and anti-electrons and energy, and I'm not going to go through it. It involved mass renormalized surface plasmon polariton effect. So there you go, alphabet soup. Rossi was so convincing to many scientists around the world that 17 scientists came out supporting his ECAT. I mentioned the Swedish scientists, Hanno Essen and Sven Kullander, who wrote this report saying it produced so much energy that it must be real. And one of those had been the president of the Swedish Skeptic Society. So my colleague around the world, or perhaps across the world. So what could be going on here? Not only that, but 3 NASA PhDs saw it and published on how good it was. This is a slide from a presentation by Dr. Zawodny of NASA Goddard Research Center, who changed it from cold fusion to low energy nuclear reactions, because cold fusion was on a bad term by that time due to Fleischmann and Pons. So Dr. Zawodny effused over the possibilities: fully reusable single stage to orbit space vehicle, engine similar to the space shuttle main engine, ouch, non-cryogenic propellant, size of the vehicle similar to a DC-9, vehicle had a significant mass margin, potential for increasing reliability, maintainability. Well, if NASA thought it was that good, where did that leave poor old me trying to investigate it? The scientists around the world had many claims. These are some direct quotes from them. If you want more detail, I'll link you to the Skeptical Inquirer article, which contains all the links and backups. We've examined every wire and every pipe. We've seen it operating for 8 hours continuously. We've measured the input electrical power as 345 watts. We have seen steam issuing from the outlet hose. The water flow and temperature rise indicates around 3,000 watts of heat out. We have calculated that hidden batteries, phase change materials, or chemical reactions could not possibly account for this. Therefore, we see no explanation in accordance with physics other than Mr. Rossi's explanation of cold fusion. So there you go. That's what the scientists said. So I investigated this at Dick's encouragement, Dick Smith, and this is what I found. Here's a diagram of what the scientists thought they were seeing. So I put together that diagram. It shows on the left a wall socket, 230 volts in Italy. The plug goes into that. A power cable very simply runs to a blue control box, and then there are several wires going to this ECAT reactor. Now the wires going to the blue control box were split out, so the active earth and neutral were clearly visible, and the scientists put on measuring equipment, including an ammeter and voltmeter, to measure the current in the active wire, 1.5 amps, the voltage from active to neutral, 230 volts. You multiply that, you get 345 watts, which couldn't account for the 3,000 watts of electricity coming out. So I eventually figured out how I believed it worked. So can you see the difference between these two diagrams? That's what the scientists thought they were seeing, and this is what I believe that they were seeing. What difference is there? In the lower left, we can see that in the power plug, the earth wire has been now commandeered and connected to the active pin on the plug. And meanwhile, at the other end of the power cord, in the blue box, the earth wire is now connected to some more secret power supplies. So there's extra power being smuggled in on the earth wire, I believe. Still, now the power in you can calculate from that will be 3,000 odd watts, given the maximum capacity of the earth lead, but the earth lead is not being measured because the scientists believe that the earth wire is there for safety and protection. It doesn't carry power, so why would you measure it? So a good hypothesis makes predictions, so they could be tested. If Rossi is really smuggling in power through the earth wire, there would be an upper limit to that power. And beyond about 3,000 watts, the earth wire would get very hot, carrying about 12 amps, and would make the wire hot and risk exposure. So fortunately, the Swedish scientists were very diligent in taking measurements. I must say they did approach it systematically. The only drawback is as we will see, they were fooled. So I reverse engineered that and got the power in the device as a function of time over their test. And I found out that in fact, the peak power going into the device peaked at about 2,600 watts, not the 300 watts coming from the power point. And that showed periods of about 800 watts consistent with the metered power at the time, but it also showed a plateau of about 2,600 watts, which was not shown in the metering, that power, but it was consistent with the earth wire capacity. So that's when we said, gotcha. So the skeptics made a press release how Rossi misled the world through inadvertent miswiring of an earth lead. Our lawyers said we should use the word inadvertent, suggesting it could be an accident. So Rossi's response was that Smith and Bryce are just Aussie roadkill. Aussie roadkill. I'm sure you know what that means. Dead kangaroos beside the road. So the skeptics thought, this is not the reaction of a future Nobel laureate. What are the chances is that Rossi is genuine? Gone up in smoke. Therefore, we'll call a fake, and we went public and said it's a fake. And so that exposed that. And that got some good articles in Australian Skeptic magazine going cold on fusion. So it was if you look up the earth wire hypothesis regarding Rossi on Wikipedia, it's now solidly there. I contacted the Swedish scientists and asked them, was the earth wire hypothesis compatible with what they observed? Their typical response was, I suppose it could be. No, thank you for showing how we were fooled. Just, I suppose it could be. Best you can expect, I suppose. So the other blogsters around the world tried to disparage my earth wire hypothesis because they had their own pet ones. One example was that the wires from the power point were actually hollow with inner and outer conductors, and there was extra current being carried in through an inner and outer conductor, which would not be detected by the earth lead. But an engineer would know that that would only be, if that was happening, the wire would melt. So that one's ruled out. Another blogster said the hypothesis was that there was a hidden microwave transmitter in the next room beaming invisible power into the device. 3,000 watts is going into the device. So what do you need to transmit? Maybe 30,000 watts. And I pointed out that the scientists and observers were free to walk around the device, which was at gonad level, while there's reportedly 30,000 watts of microwaves in the room, and that would fry their most valuable assets. So you can have a bit of fun. But Rossi was still in business. He went on to attract $10 million from a UK investment company called Industrial Heat. And the saga went on. So we needed more media coverage. So I approached your prestigious American Skeptical Inquirer journal. We needed to go through a process of due diligence there because such claims can attract the attention of lawyers. So that goes through a lot of checking and rechecking. And the lawyers had already been checked by lawyers in Australia, and the USA lawyers said this is a high-risk article that is in our core line of business. And imagine you're in court and you're challenged. You need to have backup ready for every statement to show that it's true or has good backup. So that's why it took a fair while to prepare. And we published all the backup material, which is on the Skeptics website, which is still there. And that resulted in an article in Skeptical Inquirer in May 2019, I think it was, expose of a claimed cold fusion device. And if you want to see the full story, it's all there in considerable detail. So Rossi soldiers on, still calling for investments. However, because it's all been exposed on Wikipedia and the many skeptics outlets, few take him seriously now. So hopefully we've put him out of business and saved the investors their money So who else was fooled by this? More recently, there's been the Nobel disease, which has appeared in the Skeptical Inquirer when intelligent scientists go weird. And that describes Brian Josephson, Nobel Prize for Physics, Josephson Junction. And that described his other weird ideas since his retirement from real science in Skeptical Inquirer in May 2020. And Josephson was one of those who saw Rossi's evidence and declared it valid. So, have we had any retraction from Josephson? I'm afraid not. Meanwhile, I had accumulated a fair bit of material on Nobel Prize winners and other scientists who've gone apparently wacky. And I have a follow-up article called The Nobel Rot, which is due for publication in SI in May 2021. So keep your eye out for that. Collaboration around the world goes a long way. Okay. Perhaps a final, nearing the end now of the list of claims that we've tested. Aquapol, rising damp repeller. In Australia, we've got a lot of old houses. My own house is 130 years old. It suffers from rising damp, which comes up the walls from the ground and evaporates into the room, and the minerals get deposited and crinkle the paint, or plaster falls off, and so forth. Does a lot of damage. So in Australia, there's a lot of market value available in curing rising damp. So Aquapol made the mistake of putting a leaflet in the letterbox, along with other people with damp houses in inner Sydney, in the letterbox of Australian Skeptic scientific investigator. So I was very pleased to invite him around, and he's their representative, measuring the water content of my walls using an RF field. And that's all legitimate. It's a real device and measures the water content of your field, and he seemed to know what he was talking about. Problem is, the way to cure rising damp, for about $8,000, Aquapol will install this device in your ceiling, and it will drive the damp back into the ground. I kid you not, it will drive the damp back into the ground. However, you must do many other things at the same time, such as check your roof and fix your gutters and fix your drains, and it takes a year to work. So they monitor your house for a year, and if after that year you haven't lost interest, they offer a guarantee that you'll get your money back if it doesn't work at the end of the year. What about the theory behind it? There's a guy called Willem Mohorn in Austria who claims to be the inventor of this. He says the device will tap into the Earth's inexhaustible source of energy with its magnetic field. It will solve damaged walls, moldy smells, high energy consumption, as well as having a biological effect on humans. So the status is that they had some willingness to be tested, but we haven't got to the testing point yet. Okay, we'll pass over the pest repeller. Mind Body Spirit Festival in Sydney is where they have a psychic fair, many devices there you can spend your money on to solve all of your problems. This is the psychic reading room where they typically charge $30 to $50 for half an hour. So we investigated many things there. They have yoga, meditation, personal development, music, collective bit of a celebration of the far out there. So the skeptics go and investigate and report when they visit such an event. We'll skip over some of those. These are some of the things which I show there. Electrodes on the skull to measure your brain waves and diagnose all the illnesses in your body. Oh dear. Reiki and rebalancing, Alexander technique, Feldenkrais, therapeutic touch. A new one every year. Skip over the fake devices and the radiation protector. You can find these details in my slides, which are also available online. I haven't got time to go through them all. This is to protect you from cell phone radiation. The card you stick on your phone. That's another one where I believe I figured out how they were doing it, but I can't prove that with sufficient confidence to it would pass legal scrutiny. So maybe a report on that one day. Okay. Have we ever been flawed? Some more interesting cases now. Following a talk on the skeptics in 2012 in Byron Bay, a visitor told me, "I hear you from the skeptics. I can tell the time without using a watch." I said, "Great, what time is it now?" He said, "It's 2:45. I said, "My phone says it's 3:10. He said, "Oh, it usually works." So that one was easy to debunk. The extraterrestrials, it's a funny case. Again, I was giving a talk on the skeptics. I described a claim by an old radio amateur who wrote it up in a self-published book. He listened to the sky for long periods on his radio. He noted some specific signals. He drew a graph of the time of arrival and the frequency of the signals. This is a recreation of it. I no longer have his book. And he compared that with the star map. And he said, "This is the aliens telling me where they are from. It's Booty's Major." Okay, that's how he interprets these signals from the aliens. When I was giving my talk and I described this, someone in the audience said, "Oh, that's silly." I said, "Why do you say that?" And he said, "Because I know these aliens and they really come from Beetlejuice." That's what he said. So yes, we have been flawed a few times. By the way, what do you call an alien with 3 balls? This will probably get me into trouble. Extraterrestrial. That's my funny note for the morning, the afternoon. Okay, seeing patterns when they aren't there. Pareidolia, we had a claim of messages in the Bible. Again, that's there in the slides. Dragon poo, another one. The Walking Dead, this was an interesting one. Evidence of the afterlife. A Sydney retired lawyer, Victor Zammit, claims he has evidence of the afterlife, has a monetary prize he claims, and describes how when people die, they cross to the other side and mediums can communicate with them. And he said he knows the chemical formula for ectoplasm. So there. I attended this to ask questions or maybe to heckle if it was appropriate. And someone else in the audience said, "What happens to old skeptics when they die?" And he said, and I quote, "They often keep walking around because they don't know they're dead." And I thought, well, that explains how I feel some mornings. There's a group of perhaps skeptics who don't know they're dead. How can I test things at home? I propose the 3-legged stool test. When faced with claims of new science, I ask 3 questions. Is there real evidence that it works? Is there a theory that at least makes it possible? And does the track record of the claimant support his or her credibility? If all legs are sound, the claim stands up. If any leg is broken, the stool does not stand up. But if it's got 2 or 3 good legs, it might be worth watching because it might come out in the future. Evidence, theory, and credibility are the 3 items. However, if 2 or 3 legs are faulty, then it's not worth pursuing at all, and you might as well go into something that works. Have any claims had us wondering, just to close out? This is one here. This is a little device which a claimant gave me. It looks like the video's rotated here. I've got the real device in front of me here. He demonstrated this in his home. He sat it on the floor and the little pendulum in it wobbled back and forth for half an hour without stopping. This was a puzzle because why should it do it? We went to great efforts to investigate possible winds or means of vibration in his house. Couldn't find anything. So that's one we never solved. He never came back and said, "Look, I demand my $100,000 because you haven't explained this. And I can't really test it in my house because my old house blows in the wind and moves and there's nothing still enough." But in his house, in fact, even in the garden on a stack of bricks, it sat there and wobbled for half an hour. So that's one that hasn't been solved. So in summary, you can have a lot of fun, but be prepared for the unexpected. And there's a link to my Dropbox where these slides are available. And in the slides, you'll find some additional material, which I won't go into now. So thank you. I'll wind up there.
Okay, and I'm here and I'm waiting to come back on. I can't get the video on, but Becky Strickland again. Excellent, Ian. And thank you again so much for getting up so early. I really love the Bent Spoon Award. That's fabulous, fabulous. I have a question of my own first that's going to show the entire breadth of my knowledge of electricity. Is an earth lead in Australia the same as a ground wire here in the States?
Yes, exactly the same, just terminologies. Its purpose there is safety and protection, not to smuggle in extra power.
Right, right, right. Yes, yes.
In fact, one have to be careful there because presumably with his earth wire energized at 230 volts, presumably all his metal work, which the scientists were walking around touching, was no longer protected. And I can only imagine what might have been in his mind while this was going on.
Okay, thank you. My father would be so proud. He was an electrician, and that's all I learned from him. Was there such a thing as a ground wire? That's it. You mentioned some work you did with chiropractors in Australia, and there was so much information there that I'm sorry to say I don't remember exactly what you said about that. But I spoke to somebody last week who told me she was not going to get the corona vaccine because her chiropractor told her not to. And I did manage to stop myself from screaming at her. But I was stunned because, and I shouldn't be, in this country, chiropractors seem to have a lot of power, and there are a lot of them that claim they can cure all kinds of things they shouldn't be able to claim. And the guy that runs quackwatch.com or .org sometimes goes after them. But do they have quite that amount of power in Australia?
Becky, I'm afraid they do have that much power because chiropractors in Australia are administered by two bodies, including Chiropractic Board of Australia, and they're self-regulated. The Chiropractic Board of Australia, they're all the chiropractors and they all make money out of these things. Mm-hmm. So the skeptics pressure them to change their regulations and exclude certain things which are known to be harmful, like avoiding vaccination and manipulating babies. But they tend to slap their members over the wrist with a wet lettuce leaf because they get their money from the members. And that's the problem with self-regulation. What we need is government regulators with real teeth. So unfortunately, the chiropractors in Australia are quite active. However, the skeptics have been successful in several areas, for example, in trying to get the university to close down their chiropractic course.
It is exactly the same here. And some insurance companies pay for some of it. I don't know for a fact, Medicare is looking at it, or maybe, I don't know, because I would never go to one. Are paranormal beliefs getting more numerous in Australia, do you think?
Well, I'm pleased to say I don't think paranormal are getting more numerous. They're fading away a bit, perhaps partly due to the inexorable increase in science education, both by governments and schools and volunteers and skeptics organisations, all of those things. What we see is a rise in cases which claim to have some scientific basis, like free energy machines and rising damp machines, and also alternative medicines. There are enormous shelves in the pharmacists selling supplements, so that's an area that needs attention too. So I think the paranormal is losing ground, but it's being replaced by other areas. So we must keep up our efforts to promote science and reason.
Yes, I agree. Okay, here's another question. You quickly showed a slide with, and I don't recall this, so this is not my question. You quickly showed a slide with no explanation about these insect repellents that are electric powered. In the States, we also sell electric rodent deterrents. Do they work or not?
Yes, I didn't go into all the things in detail. Yes, that cockroach repellent, that was investigated in detail by a colleague of mine in the Skeptics called Colin Kay, who bought such a device and tested it himself in his home and wrote up reports for the magazine. And he found out that when he came into the room once, turned on the light, a cockroach ran into his device and hid inside his device, even though it was plugged in and operating.
Okay, there's our answer.
As for the, so it didn't affect cockroaches. Whether it actually did anything, I don't know.
I think they would be selling a lot better and probably would be in every hardware store if they actually worked. So, okay, we have a question from Dr. David Cattell, who is on the FACT board, a physics professor. He said, you discussed how otherwise reputable scientists are sometimes taken in by frauds. Some years ago, Drexel University was doing experiments with a woman who claimed she could use her mind to bend a laser beam. Have you heard about this?
No, I don't know that one. That's a conflation of psychic phenomena and science. So that's yes. Sounds interesting. Regarding scientists and fraud, why are so many scientists fooled? Well, we've for a long time had some magicians on the Australian Skeptics committee, and they used to do close-up table magic, which I used to delight in watching. And I could very rarely figure out what they were doing. And they'd tell me later, they'd say, Ian, you want to be really careful because you're easy to fool. and it's true, scientists are easy to fool because the natural world doesn't set out to deceive them. So if someone else sets out to deceive them, they mightn't pick it up. In fact, they gave me some good advice. They said, look for something hidden in plain sight, hidden in plain sight. The trick with a matchbox or a levitating ball or whatever's done in a yo-yo, whatever's done in front of you or cards, it could be that you're seeing all there is, but there's something there that you don't recognize its function. Mm-hmm. So look out for something hidden in plain sight, and remember that scientists are the easiest to fool. And I've carried that with me a lot. Very good advice, along with Randy's advice that you should test something. Firstly, observe it under proper observing conditions. Mm-hmm. So there's some good advice for that. Perhaps practicing scientists, perhaps the deeper they get in their field, the more they lose those attributes, I suspect.
Yes, if you tend to believe your eyes. And I've always said that to people, you have to get a magician in. If somebody is showing paranormal skills, you have to get a magician in, not a scientist, not a psychologist, but a magician. Okay, Scott Snell. Hi, Scott from Capital Area Skeptics. Since Australia is an island nation and also has lower population density than the United States, is that a major factor in its success in reducing COVID-19 spread?
Ah, yes. Okay, this is not quite my area of expertise, but yes, indeed, Australia has an entire coastline of its own. Very few countries on the planet do, which makes it easier to police the borders. Mm-hmm. In fact, as I was saying, that we've had no community transmission in Australia for a long time. There have been new cases of COVID every week or so, but they're simply due to people returning to Australia who go into hotel quarantine for 2 weeks, and they get tested and they stay there. And every now and then there's a new case in hotel quarantine. And on a few occasions, that's been transferred to one of the workers in the quarantine hotel, where apparently the isolation barriers haven't been totally successful. But Australia's been very successful in tracking down all these cases, carrying out contact tracing. As I said, people here tend to trust the authorities to a high degree. And then the positive cases again get isolated, which people are generally very compliant with, until they themselves are cleared. Mm-hmm. So as well as having a self-contained coastline, as it were, and good control over our ports, I think that puts us in a happy situation, as well as the increasing science education.
Okay. The woman who asked about the electric rodent repellers said they are sold in Home Depot. So good to know. Thank you, Lori. From Eric, our founding member, longtime president, the person who contacted you, what irrational beliefs do you feel are most harmful lately?
The most harmful. Okay, well, I think one answer is that health claims have the greatest potential to do harm. As we've seen, there are many health practices which are not properly regulated. In Australia, we know that the governing body is ineffective, which means that lots of people, not only do they rely on alternative treatments which are known not to be effective by investigators, or perhaps they're simply unproven, but they can stop their proper treatment under those conditions. And another thing is that they devote a large amount of money. For example, the supplement industry in Australia is a multi-billion-dollar per year industry, manufacturing and selling these supplements. Mm-hmm. So all that money could have been spent on legitimate medicine and legitimate scientific research.
Yes.
So that's one area. These days, energy comes into it because of all the money, like the $30 million or so, which I estimate Rossi has received over the decades. That could have been put into real energy research, and the world really needs clean, renewable energy. And there are many groups and universities investigating and researching legitimate new sources of energy and ways to save energy, insulate your home, and cut down demand and so forth. But these days, I think, as regards climate change, alternative energy is very important. And of course, climate deniers is another area related to it. The climate deniers do great harm because they cut down the efforts which are needed to put in place the measures which can save the planet and stop the global warming. So a few things mentioned there: alternative medicine, free energy, and climate change.
Hard to pick just one, isn't it? You were with us last month when Michael Marshall talked about flat earthers. Is that big in Australia?
No.
They're smarter than that, huh?
Not at all. No. In fact, even the most gullible Australians, I think, laugh when they hear the term flat Earth. So that's really very small in Australia and not significant. So, but however, we get amusement through watching the UK and the rest of the world flat Earth organisations, but not so big in Australia.
Yeah, interesting. And you pointed out at the beginning of this Zoom meeting that if it were flat Earth, it would be 2:00 your time, and you wouldn't be up in the.
That's right. Much better situation in that respect.
Yes, absolutely. So one last question that's really pretty broad, but you can answer briefly if you like. Is there one or two things you would do to improve science education?
Okay, to improve science and education.
Science education, not science and education, yep. But science education.
Yes. Okay. Well, I can give one example. Another skeptic and myself, Richard Saunders, hold sessions called the Mystery Investigators, and our task is to go around and visit schools sometimes and give them talks on how to investigate mysteries. And in Science Week in Australia, we hold sessions in the Australian Museum in Sydney, where the school children come in on buses, perhaps an entire class from a secondary school, or perhaps a selected students who have an interest in, and we give them a 1-hour show called the Mystery Investigators, which includes lots of these things, how you can be fooled. It's good fun as well. And one thing that we devised is a water divining or dowsing test, where we set up a table with labeled buckets, 10 labeled buckets on it, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 10, and we show them a bottle of water. We hide it under a box in full view. We get the students to file pass with dowsing rods to see who can find it. And most of them have the rods responding when they know where the water is. And then we go through the scientific method and say, what would you do to improve this? Most of them picked that you should do a blind test. You hide the bottle when no one is watching. So we do that, and then a few more of them drop out. And then what else can we do to improve this? And they say, well, the audience knew which one it's in, so maybe they responded. So then we make it double blind, where even the audience doesn't know where the bottle is, and the students go past with their dowsing rod again, and usually most of them drop out then. So we succeed in showing them the scientific method as regards randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled testing. And if that sticks in their mind, perhaps for the rest of their life, we think we've done something for future generations and proofing them against some of these irrational beliefs. So I believe that's a very good form of science education.
That's excellent. What you're talking about is teaching critical thinking and experimental methods. That's excellent. That's what I would have said, except I didn't think of it as quickly, even though it's middle of the day here. So Ian, thank you so much. I love your Bet Spoon Award. We got one more quick question, and then I promise we'll let you go have breakfast. Has your group been sued?
Have we been sued?
Successfully.
Yes, we have been sued quite a few times. We claim to have spoiled many business plans, so naturally we're a target. I can't really discuss that with you, except to say that we have been sued, and it wasn't for anything wrong that we said, but nevertheless the laws are not very clear there, and that's one reason we have to protect ourselves by double checking everything and seeing how it would stand up in court and how we would justify it. So it's a constant danger. By the way, there's two types of letters we get from lawyers. On our committee, from time to time, we get a letter from a lawyer, perhaps on the envelope or inside, and that can mean two things when you're in a skeptics group. It means that someone is trying to get your money for some perceived damage you've done to their business plan, or a generous benefactor has mentioned us in their will and they're giving us a bequest. And I'm pleased to say that that's happened quite a few times.
Wow.
And we've actually got quite a large investment rolled up, and that's why we're quite generous with all these positive prizes that we can give out. And we fund many different investigations from interested groups, as long as they're doing something that promotes science and reason or does some scientific investigations, perhaps at a university. We're happy to give them support to their investigations. So that's another way that we support scientific education.
That is excellent. That is excellent. Your group has made a difference, truly made a difference. So please pass our compliments on to your group. Eric, do you have anything you wanted to say? I'm sure he's.
I just thank you very much for telling us a lot of these excellent stories. If you've been sued a lot, that means you've been making a difference. I appreciate your message there. And I want to remind people to please join us next month, April 17th, for Mark Edwards for an amusing look at people who talk to the dead. But thanks so much, Ian.
Yeah, and let me add, we have some more information to get out. We're going to have an outdoor function in May. We will have a picnic on July 24th. By the end of this month, I will have information out on our website and on Meetup. So check for that. And Ian, I'm sure you're dying to get up at 4 a.m. sometime again to join us.
Thank you so much, Philadelphia. Thank you so much, Philadelphia Skeptics. I appreciate the opportunity to meet with you.
You're welcome.
Thanks again. Take care, all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.